Hey guys, LQ here. This video is a little different. 2 weeks ago today, I lost my dad, and I was real close to my dad, and it came out of nowhere. Nobody really saw it coming, and I wrote a tribute for him, and it's something that I read at his funeral. But this is a tribute to my dad, so I've shared it to my social media, and I'm going to read it here and share it here. All right, we'll see if I can get through this without getting choked up, which I failed miserably at the funeral. All right. When I was young, my dad was going back to school. While in school, he wrote a story about me. It was a story about his love for me. My mom read it to me, and I remember the story had a line in it that said something like, "Eventually, his hugs will become handshakes." Well, I had a great relationship with my dad, and as I reached adulthood, what he prophesied in that story came to pass. I'm not a very affectionate person, neither was dad. I did not often hug my dad or tell him that I loved him. It was something that didn't need to be said, it was just something that we knew. But I've been thinking about that story that he wrote. I've been thinking about the things that I would have liked to have said to him. So, this is my short story about my dad. This is my time for me to say what I need to say. If you had the opportunity to visit my dad at his house, you've certainly been in good company. You've been treated to food, you've sat around the table and shared life, you've almost definitely heard some dad jokes, and you've maybe even heard some political talk, whether you wanted to hear it or not. That would be what you saw on the surface. If you look closer, you would have seen a man who was completely in love with his family. You would see pride in his children. You would see a man who takes great satisfaction in the legacy he created with his grandchildren. And if you listened to him, you would hear wisdom. When it was time for you to leave his home, there was a high probability that you would hear the phrase, "Glad you got to see me." Glad you got to see me. It's a phrase that I've thought about a lot over the past week or so. He was always glad to see people. He was always happy to open his home to others. I have no doubt that if you were at his home, my dad was glad to see you. But he usually said his farewell with, "Glad you got to see me." Well, I'm glad I got to see you, Dad. When I was a child, Dad made me feel safe. It wasn't until I became a father that I really understood what a large task that is. Childhood is precious, and my father shielded me from the daily hardships and trials of life and allowed me to enjoy the magic of childhood. He bore the burdens of life so that I could grow, learn, and thrive without that burden. My father was an example of how we as parents can inject magic into childhood. I'm glad I got to see you, Dad. My dad showed me what it meant to be involved in your child's life. He was a Cub Scout leader, a youth group leader, a Girl Scout leader. He came to every Little League game, came to every cross country meet and every track meet. Even when I was in college and I was traveling out of state to run, he would often make the trip to root for me. I remember I was at a meet in Hanover, Indiana once. I didn't know my parents were coming. I was out warming up, and there he was, on the sidelines watching me. I took so much comfort in his presence. It's the kind of comfort I want to give my kids. I'm glad I got to see you, Dad. My dad was always willing to give advice. Maybe I was having girl problems. Maybe it was a challenge in school. Maybe it was a something going on at work. He gave me great financial advice when my wife and I first started out and we were struggling a little. No matter the scenario, my father gave great advice without judgment, only with a heart to help. It was a lesson in patience, understanding, and love. And I'm glad I got to see you, Dad. When I was in high school, I watched as he brought a 6-week-old child into our home. He loved her as his own. He made the decision to adopt her, and he taught me one of life's most important lessons. And that's that family does not have to be blood. It's a lesson that gave me another sister, and it set such a high bar for the positive change that a good man can do. And I'm glad I got to see you, Dad. When I got married, he told me, remember, you're not a you anymore. You are now a we. It was a lesson that resonated with me, as simple as it was. Now, as I look back at 54 years of marriage to my mom, I understand that lesson more than ever. As I look back on his 54 years of marriage to my mom, I understand that lesson now more than ever. And I endeavor for my marriage to have the same amount of love and devotion that my dad shared with mom. And I'm glad I got to see you, Dad. He raised me in the church. He imparted to me the importance of having a relationship with Christ. He instilled in me values and integrity. When I was in high school and I decided I wanted to travel out west with a church group to go on a mission trip, he supported me and he encouraged me to serve. He showed me the way that I should go. And that was the path that led to my relationship with Christ. So I'm glad I got to see you, Dad. Fishing trips, going to the movies, going to see our Chicago Cubs play in person, sitting in front of the Nintendo and playing Legend of Zelda or Super Mario Brothers, taking us on trips to the Black Hills, Disney World, Washington, D.C., various beaches. He showed me the value of spending quality time with your kids. I'm glad I got to see you, Dad. As we navigate these hard days, he taught me another lesson. That lesson is, even though he isn't physically here, he's still with us. When I see my son sit next to me without saying anything, just to comfort me, I see my dad. When I see the strength that my sisters show and the support that they've given mom, I see Dad. When I see my brother take me into his home for an evening, just so I don't have to be alone while I mourn, I see my dad. When I see my kids, and I feel the deep, unending, unconditional love that I have for them, I feel close to my dad. I see Dad and my family because the best parts of them, and there are a lot of best parts, but they all come from my dad. I am who I am because of my dad, and I see him everywhere. So I'm glad I get to keep seeing you, Dad. I love you. You know, I guess I've lived a blessed life because I have lived a best life. I don't guess. I know I've lived a blessed life. I'm 43 years old, and the hardest day of my life just happened. The hardest couple weeks of my life, I'm right in the middle of them. It's an inevitability for kids that one day we got to say bye to our parents, and I just wasn't ready. But I've lived a blessed life because I got to know my dad. I got to see my dad. So if you've made it this far, thanks for watching. But yeah, this is a tribute that I just wanted to put out there. So thanks.